Good afternoon. I'm Andy Talkov, and as the Vice President for Exhibitions and Publications at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the Robbins Family Forum today. We're very excited here at the museum to celebrate the life and work of Emma Serena Queena Stovall with the opening of Inside Looking Out, the Art of Queena Stovall, which is the most comprehensive exhibit of her work to date, and the entertaining and often heartwarming performance that you're about to see that brings together her artwork, treasured family stories, music with which she would have been familiar, and conversations with friends and family over some delicious pie, which I know she would have heartily endorsed. It was nearly 2 years ago when I first met Queena's granddaughter, Judy Boland, and her talented friend, Dennis King. And when I walked into the room, I knew absolutely nothing about Queena. But after hearing the charming stories that they shared about rural life in Virginia's Piedmont more than half a century ago, not only did I leave the room familiar with Queena, but I left with a strong impression of a warm and generous person with a lovely sense of humor who cherished her family. And this was, as you will see, fully represented in her artwork. And I left wanting to help share that story with a broader audience. And today, we're able to do exactly that. And there are so many people who have contributed to making today possible. And first and foremost, I really have to thank you, Judy, for being such an enthusiastic supporter from the start in this endeavor, and for your patience answering my endless questions about your family's story as we prepared the opening for today. And I'd also like to thank all of the members of the Stovall family who participated in the development of the exhibition and whose support made it possible to bring the show from Lynchburg here to Richmond. And I know many of you are with us today, so how about we have all the members of the audience related to Queena stand so that we can recognize the generosity of your family and the true legacy that she and her husband brought to the world. So come on, don't be shy. So we here at the museum are also indebted to the Dora Gallery at the University of Lynchburg for sharing the wonderful exhibition that's upstairs with us. And although they couldn't be here today, the director of the Dora Gallery, Dr. Barbara Rothermill, and an independent curator, Ellen Agnew, were primarily responsible for organizing the exhibition that you'll see. And the original installation and this beautiful catalog, which is available in our museum shop, so back in the lobby, was made possible through the financial support provided by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Virginia Commission for the Arts, the Dora Foundation, Old Dominion Box Foundation, Automated Conveyor Systems, Robert C. and Dr. Carol T. Roberts, the Honorable Paul Whitehead Jr. in memory of Sandra S. Whitehead, and the Wills Financial Group. And I'd also like to thank the team here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, Heather Beatty, Brian Condra, Dr. Bill Rasmussen, Dale Castelny, Becky Rose, and Stacy Rush. That team worked together to ensure that Queena's paintings were carefully transported across the Commonwealth and designed a beautiful exhibition that fully complements her work. And one of the features of the exhibition is a contest. So this contest will run through October, which is when the exhibition closes. And so all of you and all of the guests to the exhibition are being encouraged to post images related to specific subjects that Queena represented in her work and post them on social media. So when you go up to the gallery, there's more information available. But get your creative juices flowing. I know this program will help you do that, and get your hashtags ready. And so it's now my pleasure to introduce Judy Boland, who has shared so many wonderful stories about Queena with me over the past 2 years and is now going to share some of them with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's just so great to see all of you here today. And on behalf of the Stovall family, I want to thank the wonderful staff here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. We've been fortunate to work with Andy and Michael Plum and Sam Prickett in preparing for our presentation today. There's a whole team of folks here at the museum who work together to make the exhibition possible, and we thank them too. My sister Sherry and I are so grateful to Dennis King, who's the creative genius behind our presentation. He's not only a performer, but he is also the architect, the producer, and the director. None of this would have happened without his expertise and inspiration. And he brought in some amazingly talented people to accompany us. They are Charles Staples on keyboard, Lisa Edwards-Burr, soprano, and Matthew Robinson on the violin. We've already been treated to some of their beautiful work, and we'll hear more today. And now I'd like to introduce my sister, Sherry Stovall Flournoy, who will begin the story.
Emma Serena Dillard was born on December 20th, 1887, on a farm in Amherst County near Lynchburg. She was the 7th of 12 children, known as the Dillard dozen. Her mother always used to say she had 6 girls and half a dozen boys. One of her brothers couldn't pronounce her name Serena correctly, so that's how she got the nickname Queena. In 1908, she married Jonathan Breckenridge Stovall, known as Brack, when she was 19 and he was 33. He owned a buggy business in Lynchburg. When automobiles ended the need for buggies, he became a traveling salesman, and Queena stayed home to raise their 9 children and run the farm. They moved back to town in 1923, but Grandma still kept pigs and sheep in the backyard and had a big garden which helped feed the family during the Great Depression. She spent hours painting design on tinware and furniture. She always said she loved the smell of turpentine. She also made beautiful clothes, hooked rugs, Christmas stockings, and stick horses for children. In 1945, they moved back to the country to live in a remodeled farmhouse that was built before the Civil War. It was one of its kind, probably because it was all on one floor. It was called the Wigwam because Chief Cornstalk, chief of the Shawnee tribe, had been involved in some Indian skirmishes in that area, and Queena's grandfather, the Reverend Pitt Woodruff, was a descendant of Chief Cornstalk. When she was 62 years old, her brother, David Hugh Dillard, and his daughter, Rosalie Baston, came for their regular Thursday night dinner at the Wigwam and suggested that she take an art class at Randolph-Macon Women's College. They'd seen a rocking chair she had painted, so they convinced her to join Rosalie in a class taught by Pierre Dara. Pierre had fought against Franco in the Spanish Civil War, so when Franco took over, he and his wife Louise Blair, who happened to be from Richmond, came to the United States, and he was the head of the art department at Randolph-Macon. Now, Grandpa accused Grandma of going back to her second childhood. He thought it was silly for her to be taking a class with all those young college girls. After 3 or 4 sessions, Pierre told him to paint something about Christmas. Grandma said she couldn't think of anything else to paint except hog killing. Because Christmas in the country meant everybody had to have a little fresh meat. When she took the painting back in and put it on the easel for everybody to see, Pierre just said, "Don't touch it, don't touch it." Grandma thought he didn't like it and was about to criticize it, but Pierre just told her to go home and finish it. She said, "You mean you want me to just paint by myself without you telling me how?" Pierre displayed his students' artwork at the college and put a bench in front of hog killing so people could sit and study it. Because of the positive response to hog killing, as well as Pierre's encouragement, Grandma set forth with enthusiasm and began to paint. She could envision an entire scene in her mind's eye before she ever laid a brush to canvas. Her second painting was cutting out the meat. That's what comes next after butchering. This usually took place inside a building, but she used her artistic license to paint this scene outdoors. She got frustrated with her ability to paint it inside a building. This was a rare bit of self-doubt, but it led to a more complete portrayal of all the elements of this scene. She painted feeding time later that year. I can remember going out there with Grandpa to feed the hogs when I was a little girl, and those pigs would stand up just like you see in this painting the minute they heard the handle on that white slop bucket that he carried. You can almost see him smiling. He would stir the slop in that barrel and pour it into the trough, and it wouldn't take those pigs 3 minutes to gobble up every morsel. Full Litter was her last painting with pigs. Notice those spring blossoms on the trees? Springtime was always a time of new birth in the country. Grandma incorporated the pig motif in her other artistic endeavors as well. In favors for dinner guests, and in Valentine's for special friends, where she painted pigs wearing crowns. This painting is called Come Butter Come because of a song people used to sing when they churned. Notice the baby in the baking powder box with empty spools to entertain the baby. I asked Grandma what they used to do to entertain their babies before Fisher-Price. And she said they just dipped their fingers in molasses and handed them a chicken feather. She claimed it would entertain them for hours. Now, Grandpa and Grandma were not prepared for the prices people would pay for her paintings, but a man from the Ogilvy Institute in West Virginia came to look at Come Butter Come, and he said, "I'll give you $2.50 for it." Grandpa said, "Well, hell, that won't pay for the price of the brushes and the canvas." His Social Security check was $13 a month. The man explained he didn't mean $2.50. He meant $250. So from that day on, Grandpa said, "I thought Queena needed a little hobby or something." So I suggested she learn how to paint. In December 1950, Grant Renard, a well-known professional artist from New Jersey, was on a speaking tour and came to Lynchburg. He was a friend of Margaret Stovall, Queena's daughter-in-law, and she asked him to look at Grandma's paintings. He reluctantly went out in the country to see him, thinking he was going to have to be very tactful, criticizing a sweet little old lady's amateurish work. But he was overwhelmed by what he saw. He said he was lifted right off his feet. He wrote to her that he had never seen an artist whose work was so thrilling and surprising in its character and originality. He called her a full-blown painter, and then he realized the market potential for her work. He introduced her work to Antoinette Crouchard, who had accepted 6 of them on consignment at her gallery in New York City. 4 paintings were sold there. Grant Renard continued to advise her on how to market her work. Her brother David Hugh wanted her to keep the paintings, but she said she needed the money, so she just went on and sold them. In 1956, she had her first one-man show at the Lynchburg Art Center. Leslie Cheek, who was then director of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, attended this exhibit along with 111 other people. After the show, Grandma invited all 112 people to a buffet dinner at the Wigwam. She didn't think an exhibit could be complete without the chance to taste her country ham, fresh homemade spoon bread, and homemade dandelion wine. In the early 70s, Dr. Lewis Jones and his wife Agnes Halsey Jones came down to Virginia from the New York Historical Society to see Grandma's paintings. They felt very strongly that her talent needed to be shared with the rest of the world. In 1974 and 75, 41 of her paintings were exhibited at the Abby Aldrich Rockefeller Museum in Williamsburg and at the Fenimore House Museum in Cooperstown, New York. Other paintings were featured at the Museum of American Folk Art in New York City, at the 1962 World's Fair in Knoxville, and at the Virginia Museum in their exhibit of women artists. She was named one of the 10 Virginia women in history in 2010.
And thou my true word, I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord, thou my great Father, and I thy true Son. Thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one.
Riches I need not, nor man's empty praise. Thou mine inheritance, now
Well, there was one more painting in the pig series that Sherry talked about. Grandma said it always felt so lonely when the pigs were gone, so she painted the empty pen with the sun going down in the background. She just loved those pigs so much. My dad told a story about a time that he and my mom went to visit Grandma at the wigwam. A farmer from down the road came and knocked on the door. When Grandma answered, he said, "Ms. Stovall, I have a new litter of pigs. Do you want any?" She came back to the kitchen to ask her daughters if they could have some. And my Aunt Whitey said, "Now, Mama, you know we can't handle raising any more hogs." My dad accompanied Grandma to the door and heard her say, "Mr. Jones, my children say I can't have any more pigs. But what color are they?" He said, "They're red, Miss Stovall." She said, "Oh, those are the prettiest kind." Well, personal losses come in all shapes and sizes. Grandma never shied away from painting the harsh realities of life. She had a strong Christian faith that guided her every experience. In some of her paintings, religion is just merely implied, like in this one. Grandma had seen a picture of this woman in the paper. The house is ablaze, and the woman's face is pure anguish as she pleads to God for help. She named the painting, "Lawdy, Lawdy, What'll I Do?" Saturday evening and Sunday morning portray a man going through his shaving ritual in preparation for dressing in his Sunday best, a look of rapture on his face as he leaves for church. In family prayers, Grandma painted a family, not hers, but one similar to her own. This scene was lived out on a regular basis in her life with family devotionals, always a toddler up to some antics, and a teenager shifting weight beside the door, anxious to get out on a date. Two of her most important paintings reflect her appreciation of religious ritual and its importance. She and her neighbors, black and white, all believed in the same underlying doctrines of sin, judgment, and redemption. She painted the hard reality of the black funerals and baptisms, many of which she attended. There was no prejudice, no political statement, simply a portrayal of the behavior of her rural neighbors. When my grandfather died in 1953, she was deeply sorrowful. Though she was much younger than he, she had reason to contemplate her own mortality. Almost as a sort of eulogy, she painted "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." She used a photo of Carl Hutcherson, who was the director of the funeral home in Lynchburg. His picture had been in the paper because he was the first black person to be appointed to the school board. He owned a brand new hearse, but Grandma painted an old fancy draped hearse that she had seen coming through town. Mr. Hutcherson was very pleased with her depiction of him, but his wife said that, and he wanted to buy the painting, but his wife said the hearse was just not modern enough for her taste. As Sherry mentioned, Grandma could envision the entire scene of her paintings in her mind's eye. In this painting, there's disagreement about which church is pictured. Grandma said it was Timothy Baptist Church, but the surroundings look more like Chestnut Grove. Both are in Amherst County. As she often did, she included elements of both locations. There are so many small details to notice in this painting. There are tiny black hearts sewn on the sleeves of some of the mourners, a task Grandma performed for many of her friends who asked. One of the wreaths reads, "Dearest Father." Another has Pearly Gates Club written on it. The faces are full of emotion. Some have tiny tears. Others are very solemn. The widow is falling out with grief. There's a fresh grave on the right, and the grave digger, Jack Carter, sits on the front steps. Yet, everywhere you look, there's signs of renewal. Little children, a baby on the way, and signs of spring bursting forth in the landscape. The elderly lady with the cane beside the coffin started out as an anonymous person that Grandma had seen pictured in the paper, but became someone she knew as she painted. It was a lady named Willie Sandage. Figures often evolved into someone she knew as she painted them. Nearly everyone in this painting has been identified as a friend or a neighbor of Grandma's. This painting was featured on the cover of the Journal of the American Medical Association. The editor, Teresa Southgate, wrote in depth about the painting, calling Grandma the Bruegel of the Blue Ridge Mountains. She pointed out a major contrast, though, saying that while Bruegel loved to spear his countrymen on a brush loaded with satire, Queena was gentle and compassionate, painting with a brush steeped in years of common joy, shared sorrows, and a heart that knows why it beats. One quick story about this painting. When Grandma began painting Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, she had 3 unmarried daughters living with her. They said, "Mama, you just can't paint that funeral scene. It's just too sad." She said, "Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do then. I'm going to paint 3 old maids getting ready for bed." They said, "Never mind, Mama, you just go right on and paint that funeral scene." And here they are, Judy, Whitey, and Annie Laurie. Finally, her first baptizing painting came about in 1951. One of her brothers, Stark Dillard, wanted to buy the painting, but as Sherry mentioned, Grandma needed the money, so she sold it at the Crosshour Gallery. From there, it went to the private collection of Alfred Corning Clark, who was heir to the Singer sewing machine fortune. She later painted a second one called Baptized in Peddler River. Stark was still pouting a little bit about it and said he didn't like that as much as he liked the first one. So I'm sure he had some second thoughts when the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts purchased the painting. They likened it to Edward Hicks' Peaceable Kingdom. When the museum bought the painting, more than 40 friends and family members boarded a bus to go to Richmond for the ceremony. And this is a photo of Grandma and her 8 children who attended.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. I looked overjoyed,
And what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me.
coming for to
Carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot. Coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot.
coming for to
Carry me home.
if you get there
Before I do,
coming
for
for
to
to carry me home.
must all my friends I'm coming to.
Coming for to
Carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot. Coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot.
coming for to
Carry me home.
I'm sometimes up and
I'm sometimes down, coming for to carry me home. But still my soul feels heavenward bound.
coming for to
Carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot. Coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot.
coming for to
Carry me, coming for to carry me
This next painting is called Peaches Are In. Grandma had a fabulous garden every year. She always used the farmer's almanac to decide when to plant everything. She grew tomatoes, corn, peppers, okra, beans, and peas. One day when she was in her 90s, she went to her garden to check on things. And when she came back to the kitchen, she said, "Oh, I think that's the last time I'll go to the garden." My aunt said, "Mama, we'll take you down there in the wheelbarrow tomorrow if you want to go." She was the original farm-to-table hostess and cook. In Peaches Are In, you can see tomatoes and corn, snap beans and peaches. You can see the corn growing in the background and chickens. Look at all the details. The wagon and the wheelbarrow, and that woman on the stool, her slip is showing. Notice the dog and cat behind the rocking chair. Grandma said there were always dogs and cats around in the country. So Dennis made this slide with all the dogs and cats that Grandma put in her paintings. This painting's called Monday Morning, and most people today don't know why it's called Monday Morning. But Monday was always wash day before modern washers and dryers, when you could do the laundry any day. You can really see Grandma's sense of humor in this painting. Notice the boy chasing the pig, and a little boy relieving himself at the corner of the house, and their children in the doorway. Again, as in so many of her paintings, they're chickens and baby chicks, and of course, a dog. This painting's called Making Apple Butter. It took all day and lots of people. So it was a family event with everybody taking turns using big paddles to stir the apples in a large copper kettle. The kettle in this painting is still in the backyard at the wigwam. She included a rare salute to music in this one, with the little boy listening to the man, probably his grandfather, playing the fiddle. Making apple cider was also a lot of hard work, and it brought families together because even children could help, and children could enjoy the fruits of their labor right away. This painting is called Licking the Dasher. It's the one painting we haven't been able to locate. If you have it, please stand up. Nobody. Grandma said the temperature of the milk was the secret to making good ice cream without having to churn a lot. She'd set the milk out the night before. Her favorite flavor was strawberry. This is a picture of the actual cabin on Triple Oaks Farm. It used to be a schoolhouse. Here is Grandma's painting of the cabin on Triple Oaks. The kindergarten room was on the left, and our aunts went to school there. The title of this painting is Company Comin'. The woman in this painting is scalding the chicken because that's how you get the feathers off. Again, Grandma's sense of humor shows when you look closely at the baby crawling in the doorway. Most of everyday life on a farm is involved with food, growing it, storing it, preparing it, enjoying it. Dr. Lewis Jones noted that with Grandma's paintings, there's a strong link between her table full of American food at its best and more than half of her paintings which reflect the source, the labor, and the folk technology which make these victuals possible. Speaking of company, the wigwam was a place where company came often. Every Thursday and Sunday nights, there were big family dinners with Grandma's brothers and their families, as well as her children and grandchildren. And in December, on the Saturday closest to her birthday, Grandma hosted a chitlin supper. She served chitlins, creasy salad, navy beans, crackling cornbread, and her homemade corn wine to over 80 or more people. An invitation to a chitlin supper was coveted. Besides her hospitality, it was another way for her to use her talent. She always made a favor that was significant. Here are pictures of some of the plates made for each guest, and the banner that hung on the front door the night of the supper. And the motto on the Chittenden coat of arms is root hog or die in Latin. Grandma's was a busy life full of people and activity dictated by the seasons. In one of her interviews, she said she never wanted to paint a still life. She wanted to paint people doing things. So it's only natural to focus on the people and what they're doing in her paintings, and you might not pay much attention to the landscape in the background. But in these next paintings, I want you to focus on the landscape of Amherst County. This painting is called February. It's a typical winter scene with the cows huddled around haystacks. And this one's called Herefords in the Snow. One day, when I was about 10 years old, I was sitting beside Grandma in her dining room where this painting hung over the fireplace. And she said, "That painting has the longest cow in the world in it." And she pointed out the cow going into the haystack and coming out from behind it. I said, "Grandma, that's 2 cows, not 1. And she answered, "I know, honey, I painted it." Hillside Pastures is a spring scene with the mountains and that red clay typical of Amherst County, Virginia. I've seen this painting and even own a print of it, but I never noticed the black sheep before getting ready for this presentation. Blackberry picking was always a summertime event. You had to wear long sleeves so your arms were protected from the briars. Notice the little boy with the bucket on his head and the blackberries all over his mouth? He looks like this was the best day of his life. In Getting in the Winter Wood, you can see the beautiful fall colors that we all recognize. People who don't live in Virginia might think she used artistic license to get the colors to be that vivid. But those of us who live in Virginia know that's just the way our trees look in the fall. The wigwam didn't have a furnace until the mid-1970s. The whole house was heated with wood stoves, so getting in the winter wood was really important. In the next painting, Old Woman Driving a Cow, you can almost feel the cold of late fall in Amherst County. Look how drab it is compared to the other backgrounds in her paintings. Grandma called this painting March Fury. She dreamed this scene one night and said she just had to get up and paint it. The women are getting in the chickens because the hens have panicked and they won't help. And baby chicks will drown in a thunderstorm. Here, the winter landscape is beginning to show the sweet promise of springtime.
This next piece is an American folk song by Stephen Foster entitled Nellie Bly. This piece is going to be a bit unique in that you're going to be helping us sing the chorus. So Lisa, Charles, Matthew, I'm going to ask our other professionals here today, the Gushman girls, to help us teach the audience, if that's okay. I would like to introduce you to 3 of Queena Stovall's great-great-granddaughters, Tucker, Little Judy, and Mary Beau. So first I want Matthew to give us the chorus one time on the violin. All right, let's give it a try, just the 5 of us then. 6.
Hi, Nelly, ho, Nelly, listen, love to me. I'll sing for you, pray for you, dulcet melody.
All right, well, that was really good, but none of them were singing, so we need to get that and work on that. All right, so you've got the words, you've got the tune, so let's put it all together one time, okay?
Hi, Nelly, ho, Nelly, listen, love to me. I'll sing for you, pray for you, dulcet melody.
All right, let's do it without the words, just to make sure. One more time.
Hi, Nelly, ho, Nelly, listen, love to me. I'll sing for you, pray for you, dulcet melody.
I think so. Just after the program, if you go to the bookstore and you buy this book, I'm sure these three ladies would love to autograph it for you. Okay? Thank you. Nellie Bly, bring that broom along. We'll sweep the kitchen clean, my dear, and have a little song. Poke the wood, my lady love, and make the fire burn. And while I take the banjo down, just give the bush a turn. Hi, Nellie, ho, Nellie, listen, love to me. I'll sing for you, play for you a dulcet melody. Hi, Nellie, ho, Nellie, listen, love to me. I'll sing for you, play for you a dulcet melody.
Nellie Bly has a voice like the turtle dove. I hear it in the meadow and I hear it in the grove. Nellie Bly has a heart warm as a cup of tea
And bigger than a sweet potato.
down in Tennessee.
Hi, Nellie, ho, Nellie, listen, love to me. I'll sing for you, play for you a dulcet melody. Hi, Nellie, ho, Nellie, listen, love to me. I'll sing for you, play for you a dulcet melody. Nellie Bly shuts her eyes when she goes to sleep. And when she wakens up again, her eyeballs begin to peep. And the way she walks, she lifts her foot, and then she brings it down. And when it's lights, there's music there in that part of the town. Hi, Nellie, oh, Nellie, listen, love to me. I'll sing for you, play for you a dulcet melody. Hi, Nellie, oh, Nellie, listen, love to me. I'll sing for you, play for you a dulcet melody.
Nellie Bly, Nellie Bly, never, never sigh. Never bring a teardrop to the corner of your eye. For the pie is made of pumpkins and the mush is made of corn.
And there's corn and pumpkins plenty love, lying in the barn. Hi, Nellie, oh, Nellie, listen, love to me. I'll sing for you, play for you a dulcet melody. Hi, Nellie, oh, Nellie, listen, love to me. I'll sing for you, play for you
Well, I think we've discovered some new talent out in the audience today. Good job. Sherry mentioned that our family motto is root, hog, or die. And that is very fitting because as far as I can tell, no matter what anyone has done or where anyone has traveled, the question is always, what did you have to eat? Many of you remember Guy Friedel. He wrote many articles and columns about Grandma and visited her often at the wigwam. She taught him how to make dandelion wine. One of my favorite columns about her is his description of going to interview her, having made the mistake of stopping for fast food before he arrived at the wigwam. Grandma and my aunts insisted on serving him salsify soup, country ham sandwiches, and homemade corn wine until he could barely move. When he got back to Norfolk, he stopped in to see my father and to tell him about the visit. Of course, the only thing my dad wanted to know was, did they feed you? Well, Guy wrote that all of humanity is Queena's family. Most of her paintings featured people that she knew. My grandfather was in 9 paintings more than anyone else. She was devoted to him. He was quite a character. She said that he had so many peculiarities that she could always get a good likeness of him. He was often in a relaxed position, always with a pipe. This is Brack in the Pickwick Papers. He was an avid reader and he loved Dickens. Here is Queena cutting Brack's hair. We recently came across a large collection of her sketches. Grandma often sketched various iterations of her subjects before painting them on the canvas. She also sketched and cut out figures to lay on the canvas in order to gauge the proper size within the scene that she wanted to portray. These were just a few of the methods that she used to compensate for her lack of formal training. Grandma always started by putting in the feet of her characters first and then painting them up from there. Here's Grandpa again in milking time. My cousin Chug is milking the cow. In all of the paintings, Grandpa is never so involved in the chores that he has to put down his pipe. In Fireside in Virginia, excuse me, here he is again, asleep in the chair, missing a handsome pair of legs, warming themselves by the fire. There's an old saying that you can tell the difference between northern ladies and southern ladies, because northern ladies always warm their hands in the fire, and southern ladies always back up to it. This is my Aunt Judy with her friend Mary Massey. Grandma chose to put Mary in the painting because she thought she had such good-looking legs. This is a set of andirons that are modeled after the two women in Fireside in Virginia. Grandma had made the molds, and my father had a sculptor do them in pewter and in brass. When they're in front of a flickering fire, they almost look like they're dancing. Well, Sally Mae appears in 6 of the paintings. She was Grandma's constant companion and a steady source of help for everything they did at the wigwam. The main tribute to Sally Mae is Sally Mae's favorite breakfast. She loved to eat a warm sweet potato that had been cooked the night before. Usually she drank a Dr. Pepper with that, but Grandma just couldn't bring herself to put that in the painting. The stove is the Great Majestic, which still resides in the kitchen at the wigwam. You'll see it again in a later painting. This painting is called Dressing Turkeys on the Farm. Here is Sally Mae in her paper bag hat that she always loved to wear. This photo shows her with my grandparents getting ready to send a turkey to meet its maker. The basket maker was a man named Hobart Lewis, who lived down the road. He did some work in the garden for Grandma, and he said, "That woman can do more work with a hoe than anybody I have ever seen. She could go when I couldn't move anymore, just go into the sunshine and keep on going." This is Mr. Lewis's house, but Grandma included many of her own things, as she did in other paintings. In this one, the quilt is hers, and this is her painting table that you see. You saw a similar wall calendar and family prayers. Grandma did not like empty spaces. If there was an inch of space on the canvas, she just had to put something in it. This is a trait that lives on in the Stovall family. Well, members of Selvie Burton's family were very pleased with Grandma's portrayal of them in making sorghum molasses. Mr. Burton ran his own mill and supplied molasses to people who lived in Elon and Pleasant View. He liked his character in the painting, but more importantly, his children loved the fact that their late grandfather, pictured on the far left, was included. The family was proud of the painting and very sentimental about it. And in addition to that, the painting served as a family record after they lost most of their personal effects in a house fire. This is Uncle Nathan and the Little Black Mare. Once Grandma's friends and family saw how much she enjoyed putting paint to canvas, they began suggesting possible subjects for her to paint. One such acquaintance was a man named Mr. Dinwiddie. He was a Social Security man who made frequent visits to folks in the area. He suggested this painting after watching Uncle Nathan trying to sell his black mare to some prospective buyers. When he led the mare out of the barn, the horse became very feisty and chased Uncle Nathan around the yard, nipping at him the whole time. Grandma didn't witness this scene, but she tried to paint it just the way Mr. Dinwiddie described it. The Garden Club of Lynchburg asked Grandma to paint the tops of box lunches to be auctioned as a fundraiser. Fortunately, many of the buyers framed or otherwise preserved these small paintings. The one on the left is of Seal Turner. Many of you know her music. She became very well known as a gospel and blues singer. One popular song of hers was called The Crap Shootin' Sinner. Our dad did a carving of the Crap Shootin' Sinner, and Dennis has included a photo in the center of the record. This was the first of many carvings that he did, which led one art critic to refer to him as Queena Stovall in 3D. But that's another presentation. Saturday Night Bath shows Grandma's oldest 5 children. The woman combing the child's hair is our grandfather's mother. Grandma told a story about the time that her 2 oldest daughters got bathrobes for Christmas. She decided they'd been living a little bit too long out in the country when she went into the bathroom and saw Narcissus and Judy sitting in a tub full of water in their new bathrobes. To me, this scene of the country auction is Grandma's signature painting. It took her 2 years to paint it. Someone offered to buy it, but she said she wanted to keep it because this one was so personal to her. Later, though, she wanted to go to Europe, so she sold the painting to finance her trip. And here she is on the Queen Mary. Grandma loved to go to auctions. The auctioneers would always save her a seat on the front row. They loved having her there because they knew it would drive up the prices. She had an eye for good things. She said she thought she had a little gambling instinct, that it just put new life into her. Many of you have attended live auctions. There's nothing like it. We grew up going to auctions in the country. None of the grown-ups paid any attention to us, so we could skip off and play in the barns, or scarf down the homemade pie that the church ladies had baked. When we were paying attention, though, we learned a lot by watching the demeanor of our parents and our grandmother when they were bidding. It was very important to remain low-key, but to signal a strong desire to outbid your opponent by nodding your head quickly and with authority. Everything has changed today because of online and phone bidding. You just can't see your competition anymore. This particular auction was in Rockbridge, Bass. I think Dick Wills is here today, and he told me that that house is still there. Pierre Dara had suggested that Grandma come to this auction, and so he and his wife Louise are both in it. In fact, there are, I think, 23 people now that we've identified that she knew personally who are in this painting. The auctioneer, Paul McBride, and Archie Trevelyan, another auctioneer carrying the chairs. James Davis, a close friend from in the country, his daughter Corinne's here today. Pierre and Louise Dara, as I mentioned. Mrs. Poindexter is a well-known antique dealer in Lynchburg, sitting against a tree. And Grandma painted herself in this one, the brown sweater on the front row. Cousin Annie Ford tapping her on the shoulder saying, "Don't buy that picture, it has a crack in it." Grandma said she used her artist's equipment to make herself look good. Our Aunt Margaret is in the picture. She's down front in the blue maternity top. She drove Grandma to this particular auction, and after the painting was done, Margaret, who already had 4 children at the time, said to Grandma, "I was not expecting a baby when we went to that auction." And Grandma answered, "Well, you should have been." I recently learned that Grandma, who had 9 children, had always wanted to have 12, just like her own mother. Notice the man sitting on the porch, watching as his life's possessions are being sold one by one. Pierre Dara suggested the name for this painting, The End of the Line. Grandma went to hundreds of auctions and bought many things, often saying, "This will do well at my auction." She always envisioned the large sale that would go on after she died, saying that she wanted to be there. And after she died in 1980, hundreds of people gathered at the wigwam when Archie Trevelyan conducted that sale. He sold the first few items and then just broke down and cried. But I know Grandma was there in spirit on the front row, enjoying every minute of it. of the best things about working on a project like this is discovering new things about the person we knew and loved. It's been really eye-opening, particularly as we went through the personal letters written to Grandma. It just confirmed for us how much people loved and respected her, and how our mentors developed such a personal relationship with her. We recently found a letter from Grandma's mother to her where she wrote that while she loved all of her 12 children, Queena truly was the heart of the family. What all of us who were her grandchildren witnessed is that her adult children and her friends all adored her. They just seemed to hang on every word she said. She was so quiet and humble, but she had such wisdom and appreciation for what was real and important in life. Even in her 90s, she had this mesmerizing effect on people. One of many personal letters from Pierre Dora to Grandma read, "Dearest Queena, clean your palate every day and get it messy every day. Don't waste your talent mere mortals wish they had." Another letter exclaimed, "Painters do not grow in a country every season like mushrooms under the pines." Because of his advice to go her own way, she remained artistically naive, if not a folk artist, then a superb documenter of folk life. Beatrix Rumford, who was curator of the Abbey Aldrich Rockefeller Museum, noted that her work has become even stronger as her way of life has become distant. She recorded life in such a human, honest way. Rumford said, "There's a gentleness to it, but it isn't idealized, there's flint to it." Pierre wrote that she so thoroughly identified with her subject matter that she could see it all in color and form. She found within herself the principles of composition that trained artists seek in books. Her innocence and candor were a direct reflection of her deep love and understanding of the people and the subject that she painted. Like Cézanne, she had to think, understand, and learn by herself. We feel so fortunate that Queena Stovall's talent was recognized and that so much has been written about her. There's a wonderful film that was produced and shown on PBS called Life's Narrow Space, in which she's featured talking about her life in her paintings, and you can see this in the gallery upstairs. It's just thrilling to have most of her paintings here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, and to have them here from May through October so many people can enjoy seeing them. This is a watercolor painting that Grant Renard did of Grandma at her easel. She always painted in her bedroom. Dr. Renard summed it all up in these words: "What can you say about this art which came to her so simply and without the problems that bother so many painters? Who was her guide and coach? Who taught her that folks are all wonderful, that life is endlessly exciting, that humor can be sweet, that in this complex, bothered world, there's loveliness and faith and strength inside or outside every window? We can only be grateful to the good Lord who made her, that all this vital interest and understanding of the world came pouring onto these canvases."
I've had a wonderful life. No money, but a lot to live on. I'm painting most everything, and I think I've had my share of stars. I couldn't think of anything else, but I can't think of a thing in the world but art killing. And I said, everybody in the country's got to have a little fresh meat for Christmas.
This is definitely one of my favorite pieces of the program that I found along the way. It speaks about one day returning to a place that you love, homeward bound. misty morning.
When the moon has gone to bed, when the sparrows stop their singing, and the sky is clear and red, when the summer ceased its gleaming, when the corn is past its prime, when adventure's lost its meaning, I'll be homeward bound in time. Bind me not to the pasture, chain me not to the plow. Set me free to find my calling, and I'll return to you somehow. When you find it's me you're missing, if you're hoping I'll return to your thoughts, I'll soon be listening. In the road I'll stop and turn. Then the wind will set me racing as my journey nears its end. And the path I'll be retracing when I'm homeward bound again. Bind me not to the pasture, chain me not to the plow. Set me free to find my calling, and I'll return to you somehow. In the quiet, misty morning, when the moon has gone to bed, when the sparrows stop their singing. I'll be homeward bound again.
On behalf of us musicians, Lisa, Charles, Matthew, and myself, we would like to thank all the folks here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture for rolling out the red carpet for us today, and also to Judy and Cherry, the Stovall family, and the supporters who have made this program and exhibit possible. It has been a joy today to join you in paying tribute to the works of Queena Stovall and the Virginia stories that live and breathe in each and every one of them. Please don't miss the Inside Looking Out exhibit while you're here today. This exhibit is the most comprehensive display of Queena's painting ever shown. Keep in mind, though, these are the originals, so keep the pie prints off of them. Lastly, there's going to be a Stovall family photo down front here, so if you're the Stovall family, come on down afterwards. They're going to take a photo shot. Most of all, thank you today for coming. Please join us for some pie in the Halsey Lecture Hall. Thank you again for coming.